Hey gang, Coach Greg here with Devil Dog Martial Arts, and today we're going to break down my favorite and easily the most complicated sport in the world, MMA. This is such a fun sport, there's so much going on, but one of the most common complaints I get from a lot of people is saying they just don't really understand what they're looking at out there. It's not like boxing, where boxing's a little bit easier because it's all just striking, and you know, okay, that guy got hit, that guy blocked it. But in MMA, there's a lot of diversity in your striking, and then you have additional elements with clinches and takedowns and groundwork and stuff, and it's so confusing and there's so much jargon. So today we're going to break down some of the basics of it. This is going to be your introduction video, and in each video we're going to come back and talk a little bit more in depth about each of these sections, so that as you start to watch more and more, you have a better idea of what you're looking at in the ring, you have a higher fight IQ, and the fights are going to be just that much more enjoyable. You're going to have so much more fun when you know all the intricacies of the things going on inside the ring. So that being said, stay tuned, and let's start by doing a quick breakdown on some things that you need to know about the rules when you're watching MMA. Alright, real quick, I want to do a quick breakdown on the rules just to keep you aware of what's going on. Now, the goal is obviously to win by knockout or submission. Unlike boxing, which uses what's called a standing 8 count, in MMA, they're just going to do it once somebody gets knocked out, or if the referee decides that that fighter is no longer properly defending themselves, and they're going to call the fight and say it's a knockout. Now, submission is essentially winning by either a choke or by some sort of a joint manipulation to the arm or the leg or something like that. And what happens is that in both cases, if the fighter decides that they cannot escape, they're going to tap on their opponent and say tap, 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 and they're going to call the fight. And essentially that fighter is saying, I cannot escape this position, you win. Now, if the fight is not won by a knockout or a submission and it goes the distance, then you have it go to the judges and you get scored on each round. Now, each round is 5 minutes long, and for a non-championship fight, it's 3 5-minute rounds. For a championship or a headlining fight, it is 5 5-minute rounds. Each round, in the UFC, they have 3 judges, but that can vary from organization to organization. In fact, all the rules can vary from organization to organization, state to state, and country to country. However, in the UFC, you're going to have 3 judges, and they're going to do a 10-point judging system. What that means is that whoever wins the round gets 10 points, whoever loses the round gets only 9 points. Now, sometimes you'll also hear of what's called a 10-8 round. What that means is whoever lost that round did not earn the full 9 points because the other person was defeating them so significantly for that round that it gets called a 10-8 round. Other things that can impact the scoring is if you have a point deducted. Now, the foremost common reasons that somebody has a point deducted is because of a rule violation that is either an eye gouge, a groin kick, a grabbing the fence to defend a takedown, or kneeing somebody in the face while they're grounded. Generally what happens at that point is the other fighter has up to 5 minutes to try to recover, but the referee may decide based on whether or not they feel it was deliberate versus accidental and how much it impacted the fight to take away a point. Now, when you talk about 3 rounds that are each 10 points, 1 point can make a big difference either way. When you talk about a 10-9 round, that can cost somebody a fight. So rule violations, when you get deducted a point, can be very significant. But essentially, at the end of the round, they're going to add up the totals. Whoever has the most points wins. Now, there's a bunch of other smaller rules that I don't want to go into on this, but those are really the key ones that you need to be aware of. So that being said, stay tuned, and let's get to the fun stuff. Alright guys, so let's start by talking about some of the things that I like to look at when I see a fight started. Now, like I said, of course, we'll be starting at a very basic level, but these are just some good things to be aware of. The first thing I like to look at is how they move and how they stand. Now, let's start with stance. There's a couple of different philosophies. Now, if somebody is right-handed, you will often see them come out in what's called the orthodox stance, which means my left foot is forward. The idea being that I want to be able to fire my big, powerful right hand down range. It's like playing guitar. My left hand is smart, my right hand is powerful. My jab is smart, my rear hand is more powerful. We'll talk about different types of punches in a little bit. Sometimes a person will choose to come out southpaw, which means their right foot is forward. A couple of reasons for this. Now, maybe they're left-handed, but a lot of times the reason is more complex. Sometimes it's because they're a kicker who wants to fight out of what's called an open stance, which means we're both facing the same way. So my right foot forward, his left foot forward, means that I have better access to the liver with my rear leg. So if I like to kick a lot, I might be looking for that liver shot with my rear leg. Also, wrestlers often like to fight with their right foot forward because in wrestling, they're often taught to shoot off of their dominant foot. So they're going to come out here right foot forward because it feels more comfortable to shoot off of that dominant foot. Also, you will sometimes see somebody who switches stance a lot. Now, most fighters will prefer to stay in one stance if they've done a lot of boxing or Muay Thai. It's very common because they're taught you only have to learn one system of defense. You don't have to learn as much back and forth. But there are some advantages to being a switch fighter, to somebody who stance switches a lot, right? Sometimes it's for creating new angles and being able to access them in different ways, or creating striking diversity and being able to have different types of attacks. Sometimes it's because I want to defend my legs, whether it's defending from leg kicks or from somebody who likes to shoot on my legs a lot with single or double leg takedowns. That will often help to kind of thwart that. If I'm constantly stance switching, it can make it very difficult for him to catch my legs. So these are some things to look at. It's also important to look at if somebody likes to retreat or press forward a lot. You have some fighters who like to throw attacks and back up and let guys run into it. Other guys like to walk guys down and corner them and take up all the space. So these are some additional little things to kind of look at as guys come out. Now, in terms of defense, there's really three primary characteristics of defense. There's head movement, footwork, and blocking. Now, unlike boxing, there's a lot less emphasis on your guard for a lot of MMA fighters. Now, if somebody's done a lot of boxing, you'll see them come out with a very tight shell like this. Somebody like a Peter Yan will do this. But a lot of times, the guard in MMA tends to be a little bit lower to defend against body kicks, and also because from the outside, your guard is not going to help you as much. Oftentimes, because of the smaller gloves and the ability to penetrate through that guard more easily, fighters are less reliant on their guard in MMA compared to boxing. Instead, they're going to use from the outside range a lot more. First of all, they're going to keep more range in the first place rather than staying in nice and tight. But a lot of times, when they're on the outside, they're going to be more reliant on head movement, using things like a slip, where as the punch comes down the lane, my head moves just off this. Sometimes this is as I enter in, I might do this before I throw. Sometimes I might throw this in the middle of a combination, or just from the outside, a punch comes and I throw my head off the line and count. Very common. I also have roll unders where my head comes underneath a punch. Sometimes same thing. Punch comes at me, I roll under and counter, or maybe I throw this as part of a combination where I roll under and I continue my combination, defending against anything incoming, or I roll under to escape. A lot of different reasons for it. I also had pulls. Punch comes in, I pull, and I counter. Very common tactic. Okay, so those are some basic head movement things that you want to be aware of. Footwork, now there's a lot of different types of footwork depending on what their intention is. I don't want to go too much into it today, but suffice it to say that sometimes the easiest way to defend things coming at you is just to back up or escape. Okay? So these are all things to kind of be aware of from the outside. Now, also, I want to talk about built-in defenses. This is something you're going to want to pay attention to when somebody is fighting. Is a built-in defense is whenever I throw a shot, this is where blocking and guard matters the most in MMA. I have to protect myself as I punch. So when I throw my punch, my hand is covering my face, my shoulder's covering the other side of my face, and my chin is down. I'm doing all this to keep myself protected. So when people are throwing punches, are they just swinging for the fence? Or are they keeping a nice tight defense and protecting themselves using built-in defenses so that as I'm punching, this is when I'm the most exposed and most vulnerable, is when I'm attacking somebody else. So if somebody's a very cognizant fighter, they might be protecting themselves as they throw using good built-in defenses, okay? So that's going to be the first part. The next part, we're going to talk a little bit about feinting and some basic terminology for some basic offensive techniques. Okay guys, so before I start on the jargon of some basic striking, I want to talk real briefly about feinting because it's an important thing to look at when somebody comes out. Anytime, my philosophy is anytime you're not actively engaged with your opponent, you should be actively feinting. Not everybody does it. Some people, they just come out there and they're looking to swing, right? A more skilled striker, what you will often find is as they come out, they're doing a lot of misleading to make it easier to enter on their attacks. Not only does it mislead them so that they can't read a shot that's coming out, I don't want him to know I'm going to throw this leg kick, so I might throw some other stuff to kind of mislead him. I might wear him down so he's not sure when I'm going to pull the trigger, that kind of stuff. So somebody who is active, a couple things you want to look at. How much are they level changing? Bending at the knees to make them think that maybe they're going for a takedown. How much are they turning their hip to make them think a kick's coming? How much are they probing this hand out here to make them think that maybe that jab is going to come out and extend out on one of these? All these things matter. So look at what kind of little movements that this guy's doing as he comes out. What you'll see a lot of times is as guys come out, they're moving their head off the line a lot, doing those slips I talked about as they enter range to avoid incoming damage. Meanwhile, they're adding hip movement, probing, level changing, all this stuff. It's really important to notice what kind of stuff they're doing to set up their shots. And if you pay attention to this stuff, the subtlety makes it really interesting to see who's going to land and how they're setting it up to land, okay? So that being said, stay tuned. Let's come back and talk about now some basic strikes. Okay, let's talk about some basic boxing to begin with. Now, in terms of hand striking, there's really only 5 things I want to kind of put on your radar, and that's the jab, cross, hook, and uppercut, and then the 5th one is the overhand. Now, you do have some elbows and stuff like that. It's important to know that they exist, but you know, you don't see a lot of palm striking since the Boss Rutan days. You're not going to see a lot of ridge hand striking or any of this kind of stuff. And while you will see a lot of spinning elbows and stuff like that, I don't want to go into a lot of depth on that because mostly what you're going to see is these 5 hand techniques. So the first one is going to be a jab. If I have my left foot forward, my lead hand is my jab. If my right foot is forward, it's still my lead hand. So left foot to left, right to right hand to right foot, okay? Whatever side is my lead side is my jab. Now my jab has a couple different functions. Sometimes the purpose of it is just to put something in their face so that I can send another punch down range and it's harder for them to see it because it's blocking their vision. Sometimes it's about probing to give them something to think about so I can set up another shot. Sometimes it gives me a top hand position where I'm on top of their other hand. Sometimes it's about feinting, and sometimes it's about figuring out exactly where my range is so that when I throw my follow-up shot, I know exactly how far I need to throw it to connect. A lot of different functions of the jab. It's the most important punch that you're going to see. And in modern MMA, guys are getting really quick with that jab at landing from the outside. Pop, pop, pop. They're snipers. So you're going to see a lot of use out of that lead hand. Now, the rear hand is my cross. This is my power. Remember, we talked about from orthodox, my right hand is my power hand, my left hand is my smart hand. Same thing. I'm doing a lot of work with my lead hand to set up my big, powerful hand. Now, in the old days, they used to say that throwing and starting with the right hand was called a sucker punch because only a sucker would fall for it. But in modern MMA, that's not always the case because you can add a lot of different things for different types of striking diversity off of that. That's a whole other subject, though. But the cross is my big, powerful hand, okay? Then from right here, a bent arm that throws parallel with the ground is a hook. It could be from either side. A bent arm that comes up from the ground is my uppercut, okay? Now, a lot of times you'll hear punches referred to by numbers. The most important 3 are the 1, 2, and 3. The reason for that is depending on what school of boxing you go to, the numbers can change. But the thing that is most important to note is anything on the left side is going to be an odd number. Anything on the right side is going to be an even number. Simple way to remember it. So my jab is a 1, my cross is a 2, my hook is a 3, my hook is a 4, my uppercut's a 5, my uppercut's a 6. Make sense? Left, right, odd and even. Mostly what you'll hear them refer to is some versions of the 1, 2, 3 though. I mention this because the commentators will make comments like, oh, look at Max Holloway throwing that 1, 1, 2, pop, 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 right? Look at Rob Font, how he throws the 1, 2, 3, pop, pop, pop. You're gonna hear this referred to a lot, and it's important to know what they're talking about. Those are your basic 4 boxing punches. In addition to that, you have overhand. Overhand usually comes from over top, and they're going to usually drop their head off the line. Mostly it tends to be done as a rear hand. Very rarely you see a lead hand one, but it does occur occasionally. Usually you'll see a jab to like an overhand and stuff like that. And when they do it, the head comes way off the line and drops their head low to keep it protected while they do that most of the time. Those are the basic punches. Now, some basic kicks. There's some guys who you'll see a lot of kicking diversity, your Wonder Boys and whatnot, but most of the time, the most common kicks you're going to see is you're going to see either a front kick or a teep. Let's talk about the difference on that real quick. A front kick and a teep are going to look very similar. The difference is a teep is often used for pushing, while a front kick is snapped for striking. The difference is that when I throw a teep, I connect with the bent leg and I drive forward. When I connect with the front kick, my leg is just about extended at the moment of impact so that I can do more striking with this. Oftentimes in MMA, if you see a kick to the body, it is often followed by a punch of the same or opposite side to the head. Not always, but a lot of times. Same thing goes for my roundhouse kick. Now, a roundhouse kick is very similar in that the knee comes up and I'm going to rotate, okay? It's a very common kick. So I have my front kick, I have my teep, and then I have my roundhouse kick, where I'm going to rotate it around. On occasion, you'll see some other types of kicks. My lead leg side kick, often from a bladed stance. You see guys like John Jones will use that, or Wonder Boy, this front leg side kick here. It is a front leg kick usually from a bladed position where my hips are turned sideways, so it feels more natural to do this. You'll also see some stuff like oblique kicks, also leg kicks and stuff like that. I don't want to get into a ton of that today, but the only other kick I want to mention today is the turning kick. You have 2 different versions. You have the turning back kick and you have the spinning hook or the turning wheel kick. A turning back kick, essentially I'm going to rotate over the shoulder and I come straight back with it, just like that side kick was for my bladed stance. A spinning hook kick or a turning wheel kick, I'm going to make a big circle with this motion, like so. Okay? So those are your basic kicks and punches that you're most likely to encounter. And what's interesting to me is how people start tying them together. For example, a jab cross to a lead side kick. That's often interesting. A lot of times you see guys doing like a front kick to a jab is a very common combination. This type of stuff is very interesting to me to see. Look at how guys start tying up their combinations. Sometimes you get really basic fighters that all they throw is jab cross or jab overhand. That's it. With the occasional leg kick mixed in. That's pretty much all their game. Other times you get guys with a lot of interesting striking diversity, and those guys can be a real nightmare to fight, but they also make for very exciting fights. Okay? So stay tuned. In the next section, we're going to come back and we'll talk a little bit about clinching. All right, guys, in the next section, I want to talk about clinching. Now, there's two primary reasons that somebody might engage in a clinch. One is to do striking. Often these clinches are much shorter. They generally tend to stay at a much shorter period of time and then disengage and reset. But then also, the other reason is to engage in some sort of a grapple where I'm going to lead towards some sort of either a judo or a wrestling takedown. In a future video, we'll talk more about what those takedowns might look like. But today, I just want to talk about some of the control positions so that you can understand kind of what you're looking for and what they're trying to achieve. Now, let's start with the striking first. The most common type of a clinch for striking is the tie clinch, also called a plum clinch. Generally what's going to happen is I'm going to put a hand on the top of the head, I'm putting the other hand on top of the head, I'm going to tuck in my elbows, and I'm going to pull their chin down. The idea to pull their head down so that now I can start striking with my knee to his head or strike it to the body, whatever I can access. Now these knees don't always have to come up the center. There's a bunch of different types of striking here. There's elbows and stuff that occur off here. But often the clinch is designed with this intention of pulling the head down. Usually, what's interesting to me is how they're getting to a clinch. Are they throwing this off of a hook? Remember that hook punch we talked about, parallel with the ground with the bent arm? They throw the hook and then they throw this and wrap it around it to get to some nice, powerful knee strikes. The reason you want to go for that is that knee is very powerful. You do a lot of damage with it. Sometimes they're doing this defensively. They're in a scramble here and they're going to catch onto it. Maybe the other guy's clinching him, attempting to grapple and take him down, so they're going to insert these forearms and start throwing some knee strikes. These are all common reasons to engage in it. Generally speaking, when somebody is engaged in a clinch to strike, it's a brief 1, 2, 3, disengage. They might turn them with this, where they're going to get here and they're going to start turning them side to side sometimes with this as well. A lot of times you'll see this as somebody gets back to a cage, you get to a tie clinch, they throw strikes, they turn them, and then they're often going to disengage from there because they want to strike. This is often done because the other person is a superior grappler. Not always, but sometimes. Now, when you talk about wrestling and judo clinches, you have a little bit of a different control. Remember, we talked about the tie clinch, you're on the top of the head pulling it down. In wrestling, you want to be in a collar tie where my hand is going to be on the back of the neck, and I might be going for things like snapping him down to pull his head down, or moving him side to side. Very common things. Other types of configurations I might run into is I might have an overhook where his arm is underneath mine, so my arm wraps over and I'm going to try to pull it across. This is also sometimes called a wizzer. As I start to turn somebody, if he has an underhook here, maybe he's going for some sort of a takedown, I get my overhook and I start to turn and I start to move his body downward. I use this as a defensive wrestling technique. It's often called a wizzer. Sometimes it accompanies some sort of a foot throw, like Uchimata or Raigoshi. We'll talk about that another day. But sometimes it accompanies a foot trying to stop them as I pull him to the ground, called a wizzer. I also have an underhook. If this is the overhook, then the underhook is I come underneath here and I come under the arm myself. I can use this to lift him up and move him around. I also have things like wrist control, and I have hand configurations around the waist where I get like body clinches and stuff like that. You will often see these tied in interesting ways. You have things like collar tie and a wrist. You have the under over, right? Underhook, overhook. You have double overs, double unders, body clinch. A lot of different types of configurations. So when somebody engages in a clinch, I want you to think about how are they tying them up and where are they trying to move him with this and what gets set up off of that. This is all very interesting stuff to me to see how this person engages. Now, a couple things you're going to notice on here. What I want you to look at whenever you're watching somebody in a clinch intending to grapple, who's winning what's called the head fight battle. I want my head under the chin. He wants the same thing, whether you're being offensive with it or defensive with it. Whoever is getting their head underneath is often winning this position. Why? Because they're lower and they can stand this guy up a little bit. I can also pin him against the cage, or if this guy's doing it to me, I can get underneath it, I can reverse position. That's often an important battle. You'll see guys fighting for who has dominance of the underhook. Sometimes the reason for that is if I have an underhook and I have a head control, now I can start getting to legs and stuff like that. That's going to give me access for some wrestling takedowns. Okay, so just a couple things that are nice to know and look at whenever you're watching MMA, some different types of configurations. Okay, being our intro video, today I want to talk about two different types of wrestling techniques. One is the single leg takedown, the other one is the double leg takedown. They're probably the most common takedowns you'll see in MMA. Now, a lot of times, both are used. Sometimes it's used to take somebody down right in the middle of the ring, but a lot of times, particularly when it's used in what's called a proactive shot, which means I am instigating the shot rather than a reactive shot where I'm using it as a counter as you come in. Often a reactive shot, I'm taking you down to the center of the ring. A proactive shot will often be, I throw punches, and then I come in and I'm going to use this attack on your legs to drive you back to the ring. Once we get there, those clinches we talked about, I'm going to try to win the head fighting battle. I'm going to try to get to a wrist. Maybe I get an underhook here. Then I start coming low and I start attacking the legs to take you down, maybe pulling your legs out. Okay, this type of stuff happens all the time. But a lot of times when it's done as a proactive, meaning that I attack with some sort of combination and then I shoot, a lot of times it's used to drive somebody back to the cage and then complete the takedown after you kind of grind them out a little bit with some striking and wear them down a bit. Okay? A reactive shot is often done with the intention of, as he comes forward, maybe I do some luring, I throw some punches, he comes forward with punching. As he comes forward, I come underneath, and while his momentum is high and forward, I come underneath and I take him down. That's my preferred method of shooting, by the way. Now, the double leg takedown is essentially, I'm going to try to get a hold of both legs. The single leg, I'm only getting one leg. It's as simple as that. There's a lot of different finishes to both. Sometimes they just kind of blast right through and that's enough. Sometimes with a single leg, they might get underneath and start turning and doing what's called running the pipe. Or you'll hear the term high crotch thrown around a lot. If he starts getting in high, maybe starting to do stuff like lift him up. Daniel Cormier is a big fan of that. When you hear him doing commentary, you'll hear him talking about, oh, he got the high crotch. He loves that move. It's a move he was good at. You know, and so sometimes you hear terms like that thrown around when they start getting really deep on the single legs. So these are a couple things to keep in mind. One thing I want you to be aware of is that sometimes when you see a guy go for the double leg, which is where they have both legs here, a lot of times the head ends up on the outside and makes them susceptible for a choke called the guillotine, where the arm is going to come over top, almost like a headlock, and they're going to connect here, pinch the elbow, and it's going to be super tight, try to choke them out here. Even if they fall back, a lot of times they're doing this knowing that I'm going to fall back into this choke, and they're going to try to finish them from there. From a single leg, this happens less, because if the guy's any good, a lot of times when he shoots the single, he shoots with his head on the inside. It's not always the case. There are some guys that they don't care. They're just going to come in here and get what they get. But a lot of times they will try to shoot a single leg with the head on the inside. If they do back him up to the cage, you're going to start seeing, like I said, a lot of the different clinch positions. They might start to drop down to get to a double leg. They might drop down to get to a single leg. A lot of different attacks off of that position. But those are two takedowns I want you to be aware of, okay? The single leg takedown and the double leg takedown. All right, guys, so for the last section, I want to talk a little bit about some jiu-jitsu. We're not going to get super deep on this. Mostly this is going to be a little bit of jargon and kind of giving you some familiarity with what the different positions are. Now, the first thing you have to realize is when somebody is on the ground, now wrestlers generally want to try to be on top, but in jiu-jitsu, that's not always necessary to be on top. In fact, sometimes guys are more dangerous from their back. But there's an important distinguishing feature on that, and that's whether or not their legs are involved. One of the key characteristics of jiu-jitsu in particular is once you take somebody down, getting past their legs. Now, here's the difference. If my legs are involved, I can start doing things like we're going to what's called a closed guard. This is a guard. She is inside of my guard. Now, a closed guard is defined by my feet being wrapped around and at least my knees being past her torso here, okay? This is a closed guard because both my feet are on the outside. Now, a half guard, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. There are a ton of incarnations of half guard. There's knee shields and lockdowns and stuff like that. But all you really need to know is 1 foot is on the inside, 1 foot is on the outside. There is also a butterfly guard where both feet are on the inside. Now you're gonna hear me refer to these a lot. These are hooks, and you use them in a butterfly guard to sweep. Now you can use them in other positions, so you will hear them refer to butterfly hooks a lot. This is what they're talking about, is a foot on the inside position, hooking the leg, and this is gonna allow me to start to do things like roll my opponent over. Now in a guard, we have several different objectives. One of them, like I mentioned, rolling them over, is called a sweep. I'm gonna get to here, I'm gonna lean back, I kick her over, and now I'm on top. Okay, that's a sweep. I can also stand up from a lot of these positions. If I'm in a half guard, one of my objectives sometimes is just getting back to my feet. Or I can do submission. We'll talk about a couple different submissions towards the end here. So we have a closed guard, both feet on the outside, a half guard, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and a butterfly guard, both feet on the inside. Now there are a ton of other guards that we're not going to talk about today, but these are probably the 3 most common ones you're going to run into. Now, go ahead and go on your back. If I were to get past her feet, that's called passing a guard. I'm gonna get, let's say I'm in here and I step over, I'm now passing her guard. There's a lot of different versions of this where I can pass the guard if I'm in a closed guard. You know, I can start to come in here. A lot of different versions of this. Now I'm gonna switch sides here. This is a side control. I'm sideways on her. There's a lot of different things I can do from here. I can go to Kessa and stuff like that, or I can go to knee on belly. We're not gonna talk about that today. But for today, just know side control. One of the things that's a common trait with side control is doing something called a crossface. My arm's gonna come underneath, and you see how I turn her chin away? This is gonna help make it difficult for her to turn into me to escape. Then we have a mount position, which is a dominant position. The difference between this and a closed guard, once again, is I'm past her feet. Now I start throwing bombs and start throwing attacks, submissions, and stuff like that. I'm in a mount. Finally, we have what's called a back mount or a back control. Once again, a lot of different versions of this, but essentially my chest is against her back in some way or another. Sometimes I can throw in things like a body triangle. You'll see this referred to a lot. It's a very controlling position, and what's nice about it is from the body triangle here, my hands are now free. I don't have to be holding on to her upper body with my hands, okay? So those are some basic positions you're gonna wanna be aware of. Now I'm just gonna talk about a couple of different submissions that you are most commonly gonna see, because there is a ton of jargon when you talk about grappling and jiu-jitsu in particular. I'll just talk about a couple of different types of submissions. First one we're gonna talk about from a closed guard, and you can throw this from a lot of places, it's called a triangle choke. I punch the arm in here, my leg comes over the top, I connect my legs, bring the arm across, and now I choke her out using my legs. Okay, that is a triangle choke. We also have chokes. Remember briefly when we talked about clinches and takedowns that sometimes the double leg, one of the concerns is the guillotine choke, right? This here, I'm gonna come over just like a headlock, and I come all the way through nice and high so that I'm choking her. I pinch my elbow, and a lot of times I'll fall back to my closed guard, okay? How'd that feel?
Okay.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So that is another type of choke you will commonly see. A third type of choke that's very common, I'm going to go to the back mount here, is called a rear naked choke. Okay, arm comes underneath. It's very similar to a sleeper choke. Some of you guys have seen this in wrestling, but it's different because I'm going to hide my hand and I'm going to get a nice little finish off of that. That is a very nasty one. Now, something to note about this, I'm not going to do it to Alicia because I'm not a jerk, but you don't have to be under the chin. I can be over the face and crush right through the face, and you can still choke them over the jawline. Well, let me tell you, that one feels wonderful. You will see very famous taps to that, or what's called a bulldog choke, where I just crush right through it, okay? Those are a couple different types of chokes you're gonna see. Probably the most common ones. Now, a couple different other submissions that you're gonna see for joint manipulation. First one we're talking about is an arm bar. I'm gonna show this from a mount, but I can just as easily do this from a closed guard, or a whole bunch of other positions. In this case, I'm throwing punches, her arm starts to come up to defend herself, I'm gonna come across. As you can see here, I have this arm, I'm gonna pinch my knees, come back, bam! Hyperextend the elbow, break the elbow, okay? That is an arm bar. There are a lot of different versions of arm bar, but that's just one version, okay? So if you hear them talking about hitting an arm bar, that's what they're talking about. I'll just show it from closed guard as well, just so you can kind of get an idea. Once again, she is inside of my closed guard. I come in here, turn my hips, and now that same arm bar exists from here, okay? Other joint submissions you're gonna see from the closed guard, the kimura. This happens a lot if somebody puts their hands on the ground, But you can also see this from like top half and stuff like this. They come here. This is a bent arm lock. Okay. I can also show this. Go to bottom side control. She goes on her back. Beautiful. I come over the top here. Once again, the kimura, bent arm lock, and her wrist is pointed down. If her wrist points up, this is called a key lock or an Americana. Okay. So those are pretty much the basic submissions that you'll see. There's there's so many different types of submissions, but I think this is sufficient for today. I hope you enjoyed this content. If you have any questions about things that you'd like to see me cover, make sure you let me know and I'll put that in the follow-up videos. Like I said, each video we're gonna get a little bit more in depth. We're gonna talk about more positions on the ground, more takedowns, more clinches, and more kind of like different striking things. I think the next one we're gonna probably talk about some counters like check hooks and stuff like that. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Make sure you smash the subscribe button and welcome back to the channel.